Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Stephen Railston and we must be getting our money's worth out of Samuel Luckhurst this week because this is his third podcast appearance. Samuel, how are you for the third time this week?
The hat-trick, yes. I'm very well, thank you. Very well indeed. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Looking forward to an excellent weekend of sport. Obviously, the Masters started last night, so I was sat on my sofa watching that. We've got Aintree as well, the Grand National on Saturday, and Manchester United Bournemouth on Saturday night, which should be a thriller, shouldn't it, Samuel? 5:30 kick-off down on the south coast. Me and you are making the trip for that game. We'll look ahead to that game in the second part of this podcast, but we'll just start off with some housekeeping in the first part. United announced last night that Johnny Evans and Raphael Varane are going to be out for a month. Varane's going to be out for a month. Johnny Evans is going to be out for one game, both with muscle injuries, but Varane's is a little bit more serious than Evans. I think we discussed it after the Brentford game, Samuel, the merit of keeping Varane, who was out of contract at the end of this season, of course. And I made the point when we were down at the Brentford Community Stadium, or the G-Tech, that he is still United's best defender. But unfortunately, he just can't stay fit. We've saw it time and time again, and he's been ruled out again.
Unfortunately for him, yes. I think that's 6 separate layoffs he's had this season. Of course, he was missing for the Liverpool game last week. And when you're given such a when he gave that candid interview to L'Equipe recently, I think it was last week, wasn't it, about the damage that he's done to his body, and he's telling his 7-year-old son who plays football not to head the ball because of concerns about dementia and suffering later on in life. From a more, I suppose, not cynical is the wrong word, but if you're looking at the whole issue of the contract situation, it's not exactly, a strong bargaining hand that he's got there. And I think it's the way it's panning out, it will probably lead to him leaving in the summer, which would be a pity, but it would be logical as well, because he has had a lot of injuries. He has been very brittle. He's probably not missed as many games as I thought he would. I think he's played something like 93 times for United, and that's out of a possible 154 games. Until the Brentford game, he'd gone quite a long time without getting injured. I think he hadn't been injured since early December, it might have been, and that, I think that absence even might have been through illness against Chelsea. I can't remember. There were a number of times earlier in the season where Varane was missing games, and it was either something like sore back or illness or not fully fit. That was the rationale for him not playing against Brentford back in October. So he's actually avoided really significant injuries until this one now. And it just, the way it's happened, it doesn't reflect particularly well on Ten Hag or the medical staff, because he came off at half-time against Brentford. He left the stadium. He told you that it wasn't too bad. I think immediately we probably both thought that he would play against Chelsea. I did that story on the Wednesday morning ahead of the Chelsea game, that he was confident of being past fit for it. He was, of course. And then he only lasted 45 minutes, and he probably should have come off sooner. We both saw Harry Maguire urging the dugout to replace him. We saw Gary O'Driscoll in conversation with Mitchell van der Gaag, and they waited until half-time. Johnny Evans came on, and Johnny Evans, as is his want this season in the big games, was doing really, really well. And unbeknownst to us, when we saw Willy Camboala coming on, we thought that was going to be for maybe Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who I think was walking gingerly at one point, or maybe I've invented that. But when it was Evans's number that came up, I think we were all surprised because he didn't seem obviously injured. But when you play relatively often as he has this season, he was only signed as a 5th choice centre half. And you've got the injury issues that he had last season at Leicester. You are liable to breaking down, and he's 36. It's not a surprise that Johnny Evans is breaking down as often as he is. He's a 36-year-old centre half who made his career debut in 2007, I think it would have been 2006 or 7 at Sunderland during that first loan spell. he's played a lot of football, and he had injury issues last season. And I think he's still been one of United's best players this season. But unfortunately, he started to get the wear and tear is starting to show at a really crucial point in the campaign with the running. And it's ironic, I suppose, that Harry Maguire, a defender who United were prepared to sell in the summer, is the only fit senior centre half, and the other available centre half is Willy Kambwala, who until this season was just beset with injuries during his time at United, and it's to his immense credit that he's stayed fit, and he's got an opportunity now to really establish himself in the squad. He's stayed in the squad for a good 4 or 5 months now, but now the challenge for him is to ensure that he stays in the United squad for the next 4 or 5 years, really, because it's a great opportunity for him with two senior centre halves possibly leaving in the summer, and I think it would be logical to let both go. It's a fluid situation with Varane and Evans because of their ages, because there's not going to be much demand for either in the summer. Particularly in Evans's case, I think that this is going to be United will be his last club, so he's got that chance to bookend his career with Manchester United. He's already taken that, and if he does retire this summer, then what an exceptional career he's had at United and Leicester, and to a lesser extent West Brom, playing at the Euros with Northern Ireland. But it's certainly an area in the summer that United are going to need at least one central defensive signing, and with the managerial situation as well, things can change. Michael Carrick, when he was approaching the final months of his contract in 2016, he was asked to see Louis van Gaal on the morning that United were playing at West Ham in the last game at the Balloon Ground, and he was told by Louis van Gaal that he wouldn't be getting a new contract. And this was with still 3 more games to play that season, and one of them was an FA Cup final. 2 days after the FA Cup final, Louis van Gaal was officially sacked, even though it had been in the post for quite some time. And one of Jose Mourinho's first acts as Manchester United manager was to sign off on a new 1-year contract for Michael Carrick, who did very well during probably United's best period of football under Mourinho in that first season. So things can change, and as you said, only 2 weeks ago we'd have been looking at Varane and looking at Evans, provided they were fit, and thinking, yeah, if it can be arranged, it's worth keeping them on next season, because you don't want too much upheaval in certain areas of the squad. But things have changed since, and at the moment you'd say that it's probably I'd be pretty flabbergasted if both of them are still at the club next season. I think there's an off chance that Evans might be, but with Varane, I just can't see it.
I think it's such a shame with Johnny Evans, actually. I've argued all season that he's probably worth a contract extension, just one more year, because he's been able to mostly keep a clean bill of health. But we're getting to the springtime now, and he has encountered a few different problems, which has been a shame. You think back to that, the Turf Moor game against Burnley in September, it was brilliant. He probably thought that was going to be the high point of his time at United this season. But yeah, he's continued to impress, and he's continued to deliver when he's been called upon. So it's unfortunate that he's picked up these problems as we reach the latter part of the season. Going back to Varane then, Samuel, if he doesn't play for the rest of the campaign and he is ruled out for injury, he would have averaged around 19 Premier League starts over his last 3 years. I mean, that's just really not good enough. There were high hopes and big things were expected from him when he arrived from Real Madrid. He obviously arrived with a glittering CV, and he made an instant impact. You could see the kind of player he was. He was compared to kind of a Rolls Royce defender. But how would you assess his 3 years in Manchester? Because at the end of the day, when he does leave, or if he does leave this summer, he's only going to leave with the Carabao Cup.
Not necessarily. They could win the FA Cup, and he's been ruled out for a few weeks, so there's every chance that he'll be back for the Palace game at the earliest, because I think that's 3 weeks on Monday. Then they've got games after that. The chances are they will reach the FA Cup final. I know it's not. I think a lot of United fans are probably feeling not quite as optimistic as they were when the draw was made, given how the draw was made in the aftermath of the Liverpool game. So how could you not be confident after that? But there's still a chance that if Varane is fit, and you'd hope he would be, then he he has to start the FA Cup final, and it'll be interesting to see if they do get to the cup final, how the defence will look, because Maguire is, provided he doesn't become one of the latest flies to drop, he's well poised to have probably his best preparation for a major tournament, major international tournament ever, really, in that he could be starting in a Manchester United run-in, and that's there's no debate over his place at England level. But what do you do with Martinez? What do you do with Varane? Because those two, the way United are talking about it, they still expect them to play again this season. They've not been ruled out for the season. The same applies to Lindelof as well, although I don't think there would be as much of a clamour to get him back into the starting side. And in terms of Varane's time at United, I mean, he's still got time to crown it with, or to add a bit of gloss to it, if at all possible. I think if we were to go off that Gary Neville traffic light system that he did at the start of last season in terms of where you'd rank the signings, I'd probably put him in the amber, in that they didn't, I don't think they overpaid for him. I think the fee was something like £42 million. I don't think anybody really queried that as a signing at the time either. I know that the whole there's the feeling that if Real Madrid want to sell a player, you're mugs for taking that player off them. But when United signed Varane, he was a world-class centre-half, and on his day, I still think he is a world-class centre-back. He's been one of the best defenders in the world over a 10-year period, probably longer than that. I mean, he joined Real Madrid in 2011, and it's not like he just... the first season was work experience for him. He was playing prominently, and certainly in the first couple of 2 or 3 years there was an element of rotation every now and then, because he had Sergio Ramos and Pepe as well to play alongside. But he started in the Champions League final in 2014, and he played a hell of a lot in the years leading up to that for Real Madrid. So I don't think that's one of those signs that I'm sure some people, there'll be a bit of revisionism, and it'll be, why did they sign him? Why did they go for him? It made complete sense at the time. They needed a world-class centre-back. And unfortunately for United, Varane going to United, he's suddenly become quite injury-prone. There was a knee injury that was flagged during the medical, but I think that dated back to 2013. He was not a particularly injury-prone player at Real Madrid, and neither was Casemiro. Freddie Caldera, who people will have seen, I'm sure, across his channels. He's a Brazilian reporter who lives in Manchester now, and he's got British citizenship as well, Freddie. So I think he deserves congratulations for that as well. I think he's quite more than happy to stay here, but he has a very good relationship with the Brazilian players, and he's an absolute authority on them as well. And he said Casemiro never had a muscular injury at Real Madrid. This season, he has had a big problem with his hamstring. So, although it doesn't look great that United have spent over £100 million on two 30-something Real Madrid players who'd won everything in Spain and won everything with Real Madrid and had their last hurrah, whether it was Champions League final or doing something else. Those signings, those players have come to Manchester United, and they've become more injury prone. And I know the demands of the Premier League are far more intense than La Liga, but they are two more examples of why United needs an overhaul of the medical department, because something's not right in the water at Carrington. It's pretty clear. You only have to look at the injury record this season. And it's interesting with Kambwala, who, of course, as I said, for his first 3 years, he played less than 40 games across the junior teams. That's 18s, 19s, reserves and what have you. And he didn't even play in the FA Youth Cup. So he's a bit of a rarity in that he's an academy graduate who never played in that competition. But he stayed fit this season, and I've done a feature on him for Saturday morning, and people at the club told me that he's does a lot of injury prevention exercises, and he's not the only one who's done that. Diogo Dalot has embraced that in recent years, because he was very injury prone in his first 2 or 3 years at United, and in the last 3 years he has barely been injured. He's one of the most robust players at the club, possibly in Europe, given that I think he's only missed something like 8 club games since the start of the 2021 season. So there are exceptions. There are freaks of nature at United. Bruno Fernandes is another one who we're all aware that he's never missed a game through injury, and somehow Garnacho's not got injured as well this season, which is really impressive for a winger. But going back to Casemiro and Varane, they didn't seem to have many injury issues at Real Madrid. They've come to United and they've had a number of injury issues, and it's of course it's had a detrimental effect on United's season, because those two last season were excellent. I thought Casemiro was United's Player of the Year last year. I thought Varane was possibly one of the top 5 performers. There were probably the best part of 10 players last season who were 8 out of 10 and above for United, and he was certainly one of them. And he had a huge... Him coming back into the team against Liverpool at the start of last season, that's when the Ten Hag era, that kick-started the Ten Hag era, really, and it kick-started Lisandro Martinez's United career as well. And Martinez absolutely loves playing with Varane, but it's an alliance that is destined to be short-lived, unfortunately.
You never want to question a player's professionalism, of course, but is it not a risk that toward the end of the season, if Varane does come back from his injury, is he going to be putting his body to the absolute maximum, maybe going for that 50-50 or header? That might be a risk when he's out of contract in the summer and he will be needing a new club. Is that not an element to consider?
I don't think so. He's a player that you look at the way he's conducted himself throughout his career, his character. I don't think there's a single issue with his professionalism. The fact that he played 5 days later at Chelsea, having come off at half-time against Brentford, and does he? He's Raphael
I wasn't
Varane,
suggesting that there was. I've just saw a few instances across the last 20 years in the Premier League. I think Michael Owen comes to mind, but he's definitely a different personality to Raphael Varane.
Oh Christ, yeah.
I think to the end of the contract in the bid.
That's
he's the only one I could think off the top of my head, Samuel. So about it, and yeah, I wasn't making that comparison, but I just thought it was playing devil's advocate. It was something to suggest.
With Owen, that was. I mean, there's been a lot of to and fro over that, and of course, when his book came out, he had a bit of a row with Alan Shearer, who was, of course, the Newcastle manager when they got relegated in 2009. And look, I found it embarrassing at the time, and I still think it is an embarrassment that Manchester United signed Michael Owen. That was the summer where he had to release a digital brochure for prospective clubs who might want to sign him. And the 2 clubs who seemed to be most strongly linked with him initially were Hull, who had just stayed up by the skin of their teeth with Newcastle going down, and Stoke City, who had just started to pretty much establish themselves as a Premier League club. I think that had just been their first season in the Premier League. That's how low his stock was. But because he loves horse racing, and Sir Alex Ferguson loves horse racing, it seemed like that he suited Manchester United when he should never have signed for Manchester United. I mean, I know he scored that extraordinary derby winner deep into Fergie time, but yeah, as I said, it was an embarrassment.
There's definitely a few other examples. I couldn't list them off the top of my head. If you give us 5 minutes on Google, I could pull some up. But Michael Owen was the first name that came to my head, unfortunately.
There is one who is very close to home, who is also French, who also plays for Manchester United, who is also out of contract in the summer, who, when the club said in January he was going to be out for 10 weeks, it's now been 11 weeks, and we've still not seen him in team training, and none of us are surprised about it, and that is Anthony Martial. So I'd certainly question his professionalism. I'd question him putting his body on the line for United, but I don't think that has ever been an issue with Raphael Varane. I mean, I'm not related to Raphael Varane. I have no friendship with him or anything like that. It's not like I'm going into battle defending a member of the family, but just the way he's conducted himself over the course
Just to
of his
clarify
career.
as well, I was playing devil's advocate and just trying to raise a point. We'll move on from that. There is obviously going to be defensive upheaval, Samuel. We understand that they have got interest in Edmund Tapsoba and Jeremy Frimpong from Bayer Leverkusen, two excellent players. And Leverkusen look set to win the Bundesliga, of course. They've had a fantastic season. They'll beat West Ham on Thursday night 2-0 in the Europa League, so they could potentially make the final of that competition as well. Two brilliant players there, but 2 points to make. I think Frimpong is excellent at right back, but he's played more of a right wing back role this season. He's often found on the wing and bombing down that side. So unless United are going to play 5 at the back next year, it seems unlikely they're going to move Frimpong, in my opinion. And Tapsoba, he would be a brilliant signing, would he not? And a potential one considering the defensive upheaval that we've discussed.
Well, they need an athletic centre half. No two ways about it. I mean, Martinez has been he's become far too injury prone, but he's been a success story in a way a surprise success story, because relatively diminutive centre halves they don't normally have the impact that he's had in the Premier League. But one of the reasons
sound like Jamie Carragher there.
Well, when Carragher said that, it was kind of like when Alan Hansen came out with his criticism of United on the opening day in 1995. You go back to it, what he said at the time, most people agreed with at the time, and it's easy for fans online to say, "Ha ha ha! Look how wrong he was." But this is what I mean about people giving an opinion. Sometimes, if you stick your head above the parapet, you will get shot. But at least that person has offered an opinion. There are a lot of people who are very afraid to offer an opinion, or just don't have the mental capacity to offer an opinion. And one of the reasons why Martinez is such a big loss to United is because he's as much of an asset in attack as he is in defence. His distribution is excellent. He's very dominant in duels in a defensive sense. So in terms of the profile of a Premier League centre half, he's not what most elite clubs would usually plump for. You look at the two, you look at Saliba and Gabriel Magalhaes at Arsenal, you look at Disasi or Fofana whenever he is fit at Chelsea, or Thiago Silva, even though he's a bit aging. Those guys, Van Dijk is another one. Vardiol, I know Vardiol doesn't play at centre-back all the time for City, Ruben Diaz. You look at them and they all look like they've been built in the same lab. If you were to put Martinez with them, he would look like the odd one out. And that's why Premier League clubs are going for that profile of defender. It's because that in order to win the Premier League title, when was the last time a Premier League winning side had as one of their main centre halves someone who was under 6 foot? Steve Bruce, possibly. It's possibly going back that far. I mean, even when Leicester won it in 2016, they had their giants at the back. They had Wes Morgan and Robert Huth, I think it was. And I know Robert Huth wasn't particularly quick as such, but he was extremely physical, and there was something imposing about him. So that's why Premier League clubs go for that profile of defender, and United do need that profile of defender, because Lindelof is, as we said the other week when Ten Hag made the mistake of starting him against Tony. Lindelof is not quick, he's not dominant in the air, he's not physical. Tony is quick, he's dominant in the air, and he is physical. So I think we all knew who was going to win that duel. And as you said, throughout that game, Varane was bailing United out a lot because he was having to. He was their best player, as they somehow managed to go in at halftime 0-0. Harry Maguire, certainly he's got the physical stature, but he's not particularly quick. And I don't think long term you look at him and think that he's a starting defender for Manchester United. He's started a lot of games this season, but that's by virtue of Martinez being unfit, Varane having injury issues as well. There was that period where Varane only started 1 game out of 13 when he was available for the majority of those games. Johnny Evans is 36. He's never been particularly quick anyway, and he was re-signed by United as a 5th choice centre half. So I think it's advisable that as much as they would want to unearth a defender who is not necessarily one of the most prominent, and Ratcliffe has alluded, of course, to finding the next Kylian Mbappe, and you could apply that to defence in terms of finding the next Virgil van Dijk. And they've got to scout smart there. And again, going back to the managerial situation, I know that they don't want to be in a situation where it's the manager dictating transfer policy, which has very much been the case still with under Ten Hag, but where you still don't know who the manager is going to be next season. That, of course, that has a bearing on targets, and you're not just going to say you're getting this player and that player and the other player. Otherwise, you going back to the days of Tottenham just signing players under Jacques Santini. And I think there was that, it might have been apocryphal, but there was that anecdote about Santini being introduced to Michael Carrick and not having a clue who he was, which would possibly account for why Santini left Tottenham after, I think he was in the September or the October. But that's some niche Premier League trivia for you anyway.
Well, it was his loss because Michael Carrick was brilliant for Tottenham and then subsequently for United. We'll leave it there for part one, and we'll be back in a minute for part two. Welcome back to part two of Manchester is Red podcast. We'll look ahead to the Bournemouth game tomorrow evening, Saturday evening, down on the south coast. It's a 5:30 kickoff in this little segment, and we'll make it relatively quick, I believe, Samuel, because you're off to Carrington for the press conference. And we obviously don't know the team news as we are recording this podcast, so when it is released, it probably will be confirmed. But Rashford and McTominay could be out of the game. Does that mean Anthony comes in naturally? He was quite bright, wasn't he? Can we shoehorn Mason Mount in? Samuel, I've made the case a few times that he should come in for Casemiro. Is Casemiro really needed in a game like this against Bournemouth? There's a few team selection talking points for you there to expand on.
Well, Casemiro got the winning goal at Bournemouth last season, and I'd still argue that I think he is needed because United, just as idealistic as it sounds to play Kobbie Mainoo with Mason Mount or Mainoo with Christian Eriksen and completely control the game. Does anybody think United are capable of doing that against Bournemouth, who are no mugs? They battered United 3-0 at Old Trafford in December. They've got some really good players. The coach there has got his fingerprints all over that team, and he's done that quicker than Erik Ten Hag has at United. You still don't look at United as a team that is playing in the manager's image, but that is very much the case at Bournemouth. I know Bournemouth last week they had a really poor result against Luton, losing 2-1 quite late on, and they've not set the world alight as such, but I don't think anybody was expecting them to elevate in the top 10. I mean, Bournemouth just being in the Premier League is a success in itself. It was a major success that they stayed up last season. Then to change manager when Gary O'Neill did such a terrific job was a very bold move, and it didn't start well under Iraola, but they have done well. I think before the Luton game they'd won 3 on the spin, so they're as I said, they're no mugs, and I don't see this as a game where you go there and you just think, play carp diem football, just play playmakers here, there, and everywhere, and try and dictate the game. United are incapable of doing that, and there's an 8-day gap between games because they play on the Sunday when it's the FA Cup semi-final against Coventry. So do you really want Casemiro going 15 days? Would it have been 15 days?
The thing is with that, Samuel,
14 days without playing?
I thought he was really poor because he has against Liverpool. I thought he was really poor. I mean, but he improved slightly in the second half, obviously, and that probably coincided with the tempo increasing after the goals and the performance upping from his teammates. But I just thought he was sloppy, his passing was poor, his positioning was questionable. I think there's been a real drop-off. I mean, there has been a real drop-off, particularly in the last few weeks since he's come back from that injury in January. I just don't think he's been very good at all. And I think he's just starting by default. I think we'll probably agree he's starting by default. And the problem is there's no solution to that. Yes. And I'd argue just throw Mason Mount in there. I know you've kind of suggested that it's kind of just crossing your fingers with that, but he's not doing anything for me at the moment, Casemiro. He's not justifying a start.
No, he isn't. And I think, but I don't think that you've got to play the long game, because if you take him out of the team at this stage of the season, there's no real intention of putting him back into it. But you going into a FA Cup final, probably against Manchester City, with Mason Mount and Kobbie Mainoo as your midfielders.
Well,
No,
could you not try it for this game?
need
I agree with that.
you
I
need to make.
agree with that. But could you not try it against Bournemouth in this kind of game where I think it could play
But
to
if you're
Mount's
playing the
strengths?
long game, where are you going with that? The cup semi-final against Coventry is banana skin, in that Coventry have very little to lose there. In essence, nobody realistically expects them to beat United. There's going to be a nerviness about United that day, I think, because just look at the way they play this season. It's going to be their biggest game of the season, and they really need experienced players. And I completely agree with you. Casemiro is playing by default. I also think he should be sold in the summer. He's on his last legs. But I applied to this to Aaron Wan-Bissaka as well, who again is starting by default because both left backs are made of balsa wood. But he should also be sold in the summer. But while he is available, you've got to maximise him. You've got to make the most of him. The best players do not always make for the best team. Casemiro is one of United's best players on his day. We just haven't seen it anywhere near often enough this season. And I don't think that, as we going back to that point we made on Monday, was it, in terms of this squad, this team playing for Ten Hag and being behind Ten Hag, you don't look at, there are hardly any players we've seen this season where you'd look at them and you'd say he's not trying or he's not committed to the cause. And Casemiro, for all his faults, he is committed. He was a character-driven signing. I know they overspent to get him in towards the end of the summer transfer window, but there was that reassurance that, well, he actually does want the challenge of playing for Manchester United and trying to make Manchester United better again. It worked out for one season. It's certainly not worked out this season, and he cannot be. I don't think he can be at United next season, never mind in the starting 11. But United have got to be using this bank of games before and after the FA Cup semi-final, in the hope that they do get to the FA Cup final, to build momentum for the Cup final. When it was the Cup final last season, because of the injury to Anthony and the injury to Anthony Martial as well, you knew that it was going to be Fernandes on the right. It was going to be Eriksen behind. Who was the striker that day? Was it Rashford who's starting up front?
In the Carabao Cup final?
No,
not
the
start. Oh,
no,
right,
Weghorst didn't start the FA Cup final. Who was on there? I've had a mind blank here. I'll have to look it up. But
I'm going back
I think
now.
it was
Rare for you.
It was the midfield was the midfield in both cup finals. In fact, was Fred and Casemiro, and everyone knew that Fred was going to be leaving in the summer. And he'd already had that conversation with Marco Silva outside the ground at Old Trafford. Fulham were already interested, but you knew he had to start the cup final because it was the best thing for the team. Now, it didn't work out because Fred could either be absolutely brilliant. It was actually Jadon Sancho who started on the left
up front at the same time.
Yeah.
So obviously Casemiro, Fred, and Eriksen with the midfield, Fernandes on the right, Sancho on the left, and Marcus Rashford through the middle. I actually remember writing a piece about Sancho, but his performance was that forgettable. It's not given to either of our minds there.
I was just about to say that. No wonder I couldn't remember it, because it was a forgettable performance, and he also was anonymous that day. But the midfield, you knew it had to be Fred and Casemiro going into that game. It didn't work out. Fred was appalling. Unfortunately for him, it was one of his worst ever performances for United. He was really bad. Nobody really performed for them that day apart from Wan-Bissaka, I think it was. I think Wan-Bissaka was the only one who really emerged with any real credit performance-wise in the cup final. But this is not the time for experimenting, especially if you're Erik Ten Hag and your future's in the balance. If anything, it's probably more teetered in the likelihood of him going rather than staying, I would say, because they're not going to be in the Champions League next season. They certainly won't be favourites to win the FA Cup. And even if they do win the FA Cup, does that offer him a stay of execution. It's debatable. We'd have to assess that at the time. But I just don't see the point of putting a player in, and then the next week you still go with that player in an FA Cup semi-final when he's not really had any rhythm. Look, Mason Mount should have started it against Chelsea, I thought, but Anthony came in and Anthony was excellent, and he was pretty bright, and very unfortunate not to start against Liverpool last week. I know Ten Hag said that he didn't have he wasn't in a robust enough state to start 2 games within the space of 3 or 4 days. But when people saw that team and saw that Rashford was starting ahead of Anthony, I think any rationale they weren't having, because Rashford didn't deserve to start. Some popular former United player was telling me before the game, not long after the team sheet had dropped, that no way would Rashford had ever effing played for me again after his performance at Chelsea. So if Rashford is out of the Bournemouth game, and look, he wasn't visible in the training imagery that was released in midweek, 1, I don't think he would be a great loss. 2, he shouldn't be starting anyway.
I get your point with Casemiro, and I actually agree with the logic. It's just the problem is when you watch that midfield the last weeks, it's just so frustrating, isn't it? And you try to think of a solution in your head. And I guess Mason Mount is the only player in my head who could maybe.
He also gets the best out of. He also gets Kobbie Mainoo does benefit from playing with Casemiro. Kobbie Mainoo has not. He's not. Has he even started the game alongside Mason Mount? I don't think he has.
I completely agree.
Go back to pre-season, and they had a few games, didn't they, when they started alongside each other?
We'll keep on talking about the midfielders, Samuel. We'll keep on saying it's a problem. You get these screenshots of the game of the spaces that emerge that a bus can fit in, and we do suggest they're obviously structural and tactical. But I think something has to change for me. It's just kind of doing the same thing over and over again, and the same problems keep on happening.
But we're in April now. We're in April now, and this manager is not going to.
True, I suppose so.
If he does find a solution,
isn't it?
You have to doff your cap to him. But even if he does, it'll be, Christ, you really took your time to plug the gaps there.
That's a good point. The Champions League places, they actually took a blow last night because Liverpool got hammered 3-0 at home. Jurgen Klopp's potential last European night, and just got absolutely annihilated there by Atalanta, Rasmus Højlund's former club, of course. And then Leverkusen, as I mentioned before, beat West Ham 2-0. So we've talked about the coefficient a few times on this podcast and how it might impact the Champions League places. Obviously, 5th might have got a Champions League place, but now that looks a little bit more likely. We've been kind of assessing United's chances of getting Champions League based on that 5th position. But if it just goes down to 4 places, the chances of securing Champions League football next season look really slim, don't they?
Well, I've just got it up now, and I take it's the season country coefficients, and Italy and Germany are in the top 2. That says it was updated on 12th of April, very early this morning. So that's up to date. It's got English clubs 5 out of 8 in, but of course, as you said, I can't see West Ham getting through against Bayer Leverkusen. It sounded like it was a bit like you. I tuned into the golf last night, and I just flipped through some of the highlights of the Liverpool defeat and saw the goals from the West Ham game. But it looked like West Ham, classic Moyes, just copy the same formation as the opponents, stay deep, do bugger all in the final third, and try and get out of there with a draw, pretending that you're somehow inferior to them, even though you'd have spent far more money than them. And it sounds like they got what they deserved, losing 2-0 to 2 late goals. So that would have been particularly galling for them. And I don't think many people will be expecting West Ham to overturn that in the second leg. I think Liverpool are pretty much dead in the water, and as far as the Europa League is concerned, which, let's face it, it's funny. It really is funny. I heard a Scouser talking about how many people would be going to Dublin for Jürgen's send off in May, when it came out that he was leaving at the end of the season, and how they would be crossing the Irish Sea and all this, that, and the other.
Your accent started well there, but it dropped off.
It's just, oh, come on! Look, maybe I'll have to blame the microphone, but I'm doing it half-hearted. I can do it far better than that. But but that is just legit. That is just objectively funny if you're not a Liverpool fan. So if they do turn it around, and look, they've done it before, but given that they are going for the title, and really they would like to, they want to be at the COP with all their flags out, seeing the Premier League trophy. We weren't there in 2020, but we could be there this year. This is our year. This means more. All that nonsense. They would much rather win the Premier League title than however many going to Dublin for a Europa League final, and that's got to be prioritised for them now. But I don't think any United fan, if you're a United fan, you sat in the telly watching Atalanta Liverpool, hoping, willing Liverpool to win for the coefficients, so England would finish in the top two. You probably should seek allegiance. You seek a change of allegiance. I don't think there's a single United fan in the world who would have been behaving like that last night, and there would have been many United fans reveling in Atalanta, thumping Liverpool.
I mean, same with Manchester City, Real Madrid. United fans were wanting Madrid to hammer City at the Bernabeu.
Yeah, and you'd want Bayern Munich, if you're a United fan, you'd want Bayern Munich to knock out Arsenal as well, to spare the world of Arsenal fans, giddy and arrogant Arsenal fans resurfacing. I was at school when Arsenal were quite good and used to win the title every now and then, and it's something. Arsenal being a success is something to be avoided. I can't stress that enough. It was not pleasant at times. I could, there are some choice words that I can't really use on air here, but it was not good. Arsenal being successful at times under Wenger. Fortunately, they couldn't ever really properly back it up as far as the title was concerned. But yeah, I had a conversation with a friend about this the other night, and I was struggling to settle on a word to describe their following when they're in the ascendant, and he came out with one which, as I said, is very much
it's not past the watershed, is it? Yeah. Come for the Manchester United.
Even if it was past the watershed, I don't think I'd have got away with it.
I was going to say, come for the United analysis and stay for Samuel's impression of Scousers, because that is #content. You hear that word, Samuel, but we'll use it. Thanks for your time, Samuel.
You're welcome. I think I've possibly dug my own grave there, because I just hope it's not going to get clipped up.
I was about to say, I hope it is. I hope it is clipped up. Yeah, we'll know on that drive down to Bournemouth tomorrow afternoon, no doubt. I'll see you in under 24 hours. Thanks to listeners as usual. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back on Monday. Take care.